goodness. Well, it is the month of September, which means that it is time for another garden tour. If this is your first time joining me on one of these, hello. My garden is in Southern Ontario in Toronto, and I have been doing garden tours now every single month for the year of 2020, documenting how the garden changes month over month. I have found that on the YouTube scheme, a lot of Canadian gardens are underrepresented. So that was part of the inspiration behind why I decided to start filming my garden space every single month. So if that's something that interests you, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because I have been doing all of these since January 2020 and plan to continue right up until December, showcasing how a garden in Canada changes every single month, what is in bloom month to month, and what are some of the garden tasks related to those blooms. As gardening here in the GTA is going to be drastically different from another part of Ontario, say Northern Ontario, or the Maritimes, or the Prairies, or even BC. Now, ironically, today is actually the fall equinox, so this is, I guess, end of summer, beginning of fall garden tour as well. I try really hard to get out here about mid-month so that it is a better representation of the month, and I find that almost every single time I end up getting out here at the end of the month instead, and then what I've been doing instead is collecting little snippets throughout the month. So there may be certain things that I talk about now that are no longer in bloom today, but say they were 3 or 4 days ago. And I'll pop up a little image on the screen to represent that. So let's get into it. So one of my favorite things about this time of year is being able to decorate the front stoop with some colorful bits and bobs. So this year, I like to pick up the mums from Costco because the price point is amazing. They always have these like style mums, so it's got the 3 colors in one pot. But the pot itself is fairly small and tends to dehydrate pretty quickly, so I put it into another pot that I had and just tossed a bit more soil in so that I didn't have to be as on top of watering it. But all of the pumpkins and both of these straw bales, plus 2 other straw bales that are the same size, all of this was $32. Now, if you try and get something like this in the city, the price point that you're paying is so much more. Like, the pumpkins tend to go for between $5 to $10, maybe even $15 a piece, especially for the fancier ones. And straw bales typically start at $7 to $10 a piece. But usually they're tiny little things. They're wrapped in plastic and they're on sale half price for $10. The regular price point is like $20, which is such a ripoff. So if you have the time, it's so worth taking a country drive outside of the city and just seeing the colors, seeing the countryside, seeing some of the agriculture, and picking some up like direct from a farmer, or even some of these stands on the side of the road, because the money that you're going to save is crazy. So I still want to try and add a few more bits and bobs into this, but I have been struggling finding pre-made things, so I'm probably going to turn it into a little arts and crafts project with my little one. Now, you may notice there's all this white stuff all over the floor here, and this is diatomaceous earth. When I was doing a little bit of cleanup before putting down the decor, I found like a crazy ant colony, and normally I'm fine with ants being in my garden, but these guys were all coming into the house and I couldn't figure out where they had been coming from. And it turns out that underneath the mat here and along the crease there and underneath the actual stones, they like thousands and thousands and thousands of ants. So it was time for me to commit some mass murder, and it worked really effectively. By the next day, I have not seen a single ant moving, and as long as this stuff doesn't get wet, it will stay effective. So I'm gonna leave it there until it either blows away or it rains. And that way, if any of the eggs hatch, because there were a lot of eggs, like I have never seen so many ant eggs before, then it will hopefully tackle the results of those eggs as well. And moving over here, our blueberries, it is pretty well done. There's a few left over on here, but they're really, even though they may be ripe, they were just so tiny and kind of not very edible, and even the birds aren't going after them. But what is really nice is, fall is coming. We're starting to get all of the really pretty pink tinge on the leaves. And one thing about fall, well, not even fall, is just kind of this late summertime. This is where foliage shines, specifically grasses. So I popped over to the botanical gardens because I don't have a lot of grass in my space, and I took a few shots of their grasses there because the mass plantings and the way it billows and moves and the fuzzy little bits on them, it is just, it's so pretty this time of year. This is really when they get to shine, when all the other flowers are kind of getting stagnant or older, or the blooms have all faded away. Because you may notice in my garden space, the blooms are pretty much the exact same as they were last month. There's really nothing new to be showing and reporting. But what is new is we have repeats from June. Which is always really cool, and that tends to happen most years. Is in June we'll have things like lavender and the clematis and strawberries, and then they die out over the summer and they come back and they rebloom for me or refruit for me in September. So this guy here, I'm pretty sure was a black-eyed Susan that got missed from when I had transplanted them before, but I'm not 100% sure because it's coming and looking way more like a coneflower. So I have left it. I'm gonna see what it actually develops into before deciding where I want to move it to. So it's kind of in a very odd spot over here. Tucked in back here, my balloon flower or bellflower is still going strong. It is incredible. This thing has bloomed all season long. It's given me a good amount of seeds, a good amount of blooms, and I'm really looking forward to propagating that and having more of that throughout my garden space. In behind that, we have the moonflower vine, and these tend to struggle a little bit in Ontario because our growing season isn't quite long enough and hot enough for its liking. But I think I have finally found a place in my yard where it is really happy, and this is just one plant and it has grown all the way up and over the roof at this point. It's given me a good amount of blooms, more blooms than I've ever had out of one before. I think I've had 5 blooms so far, and we still have another one coming, and we also have a bunch of seed pods that are about ready to be harvesting now too. So I'm gonna hopefully be able to collect and do that again, and I think this is going to be a spot, and I may also try and do some on the other side too, and maybe even along the back wall, because it seems to really like it in these areas. Purple leaf sand cherry is also, its maroon color is coming in stronger as it sits in the sun. The leaves that don't get as much sun will have this more greenish tinge, and then the ones that are in full sun get the purpley color. The silver mound artemisia, at the end of this season, it starts to get these little balls on them, which I guess is like its little flower, and so it loses some of its fuzzy state, but it's still a very pretty plant. It's just, it starts to look a little deflated this time of year. I had popped in a bunch of piglet fountain grass, and I keep doing this. I buy plants, I have great intentions, and then by the time I actually get around to planting them, they're like half dead. And sometimes they're able to rebound, other times they are not. The middle one here looks like it's doing okay. The other ones have a lot of dead grass throughout, but I'm hoping that they pull through, but these are gonna give me some nice repetition and form along this space. I think it was in my July tour, I had mentioned that I don't have enough repetition, and that was one of the things that was bothering me in design, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with the space where my Japanese maple had died. So over here is that space, and what I didn't realize when our little fairy spool arrived was that the symmetry it was going to provide off of the barrel was actually quite excellent. So I really like the kind of balance that it is now playing out in this space, because I have the round brownish barrel here, and then the fairy spool over here are 2 silver mounds, and then I've got the grassy bits in the middle. I have the 2 taller shrubs here, which will also begin to provide a bit of a wall of color behind the foliage, so we're not just staring at the brick of the house, and also even a bit of privacy into the window. And then the area left back over here is a drier, full sun, very colorful. That's where we have a lot of blooms that come up. Editing Christine here. Just one quick note to add into this video is that now is a really great time to start thinking about your spring bulbs. They are all available in stores now, and at places like Costco, they come out crazy early, even in August sometimes. And although we don't want to necessarily be planting them until October, you do want to start thinking about where you're going to be planting them and really navigating your space and figuring out where they could best be served and the corresponding bloom times, because not all spring bulbs bloom at the same time. So if you tune back into my April or my May garden tours, you can see what is blooming when for our area, and then hopefully be able to use that to plan out where you want to put some of your items. And I've put a new one in there to replace the lilac that it croaked. I didn't maintain it very well and it was too dry back there. So instead I've replaced it with an autumn joy stone crop, and the bees and apparently the flies are absolutely loving it. But in this month and probably into October, the blooms on these are so pretty, and they are one of the new blooms that you will see this time of year. So the dahlias are also still trucking along really quite nicely. I got these from Costco, and they were I think they were called Tahitian Sunrise or something like that. And what I have noticed with them is the first few that come out have a lot of pink, like this hot pink color. Almost all of the plants, or sorry, all of the bloom will have that really hot pink color. And as the season progresses, they become more and more yellow and less of the pink shows up. So I'm still debating whether or not I want to replant this dahlia or I'm going to get a different dahlia to plant instead, because I really like the pink on it. The yellow, it just kind of is lackluster. So I'm not too overwhelmed by it, but I have enjoyed dahlias because they are so low maintenance, and they provide so many blooms on one flower, and the more you cut them, the more they give. Our hostas are also still blooming well over here. I ended up making this little guy after hauling out all of our rocks everywhere. I had kind of a little blank spot until things grow in a bit more, so repurposed him. I have another stone crop back in here. I really like this one. I don't remember the exact name, but I will get it and pop it on. But there we go. Have it focus in. It gets more of like a burgundy color flower. A pink flower on the burgundy leaves, and I really quite like it. I had transplanted it earlier, which is why it's a little floppy, and I'm hoping next year it will stiffen up a bit better. Now back in here, the salvia is still blooming strong, and it just keeps reoccurring. And the black-eyed Susans are finally fading out, but they will normally, if you have a really large mass planting of them, they're normally still blooming quite strong into this time of year. So I'm looking forward to this whole zone filling in with those. Now, when I mentioned that the spring blooms start to come back, this is what I'm talking about here. So our lavender, I had chopped it all back, and you can see it is all back in bloom and has put on huge amounts of growth. This lavender is so happy in this spot. I've got it at the base of my roses beside a peony, and it loves it. And then I ended up putting one of the dahlias here when the fairy spool went in. I had to retransplant that, so it needs a little, deadheading. But as you can see here, like they are yellow with almost no pink on them, because this one has been blooming longer than the other ones have. My climbing rose, let's see if I can find some up here, is still pumping out blooms. And what I have noticed with this particular rose is that as the season progresses, it begins to produce red tinged flowers. I'm really not sure why that happens, but the yellow starts to put out just a little bit of red here and there. And moving over this way, my clematis is also back in business. And apparently so are the bees. I'm being like attacked over here, which was such a nice surprise, because I didn't end up pruning it like I suggested that you do. I think it was in the May or the June tour. Normally if you prune it back, then you're going to get some better blooms, but it did it all on its own, no work. And the arbor has almost closed in now. There's just a little bit of a gap left. So I still want to put in, I think, some climbing annuals around this arbor just to help give it a longer bloom throughout the season. But otherwise, it's finally getting the fullness that I was hoping it would achieve. Now coming through the arbor, this little pathway here is covered in two different types of thyme. One is your traditional creeping thyme, and the other one is lemon one. So it smells really, really yummy when you step on it. And it needs to be trimmed yet again. It is taking over all of the rocks. I mean, the whole point is for it to take over, but I would still like to be able to see the stepping stones through it. So it needs to be trimmed up again. I may even lift the stepping stones and put them over top, and that way the new growth is buried underneath and may kind of help prevent that. We'll see. It will probably continue to just take over, but it seems to have worked when I did that with the logs. Instead of pulling it up and trimming it over here, I just placed the log on top of it and let it carry on and do its thing, and I don't have to fight it over there now, where over here I have not done that. I had just trimmed it back and it keeps trying to grow. So I think that may be the better way in kind of keeping this tamed and to my liking, but I am really happy with how it has filled in. The roses are just a workhorse. They keep on going. They need some deadheading over here, but like, especially now that the weather has cooled off a little bit again, like so many new buds are coming out and they just keep going and going and going. I like roses. People seem to struggle with roses in a few ways or be intimidated by roses, but they're so impactful in a garden space, and they bloom in our area at least from June right through until December. Sometimes I will still have blooms, which is just crazy. That little hydrangea that I keep bringing up and mentioning, it still has green, but I think we're going to be calling this one a loss. I don't think it is going to be staying with us and coming back next year, but time will tell. But it's like the saddest little plant ever. Our lamb's-ear, God, I love this stuff. It's like the silver mound for me, where it's a texture piece in the garden, and I absolutely love pieces that I can come in and just touch. I'm such a tactile sort of person, so these they make me very happy that way. And our red bud over here, it has grown in really nicely this year. It's starting to get some really good shape. I'm really hoping that this coming spring is going to be the spring that it finally blooms, but I may still have to wait one more year. But it finally has enough fullness that I popped in a solar light to help accentuate it in the evenings. This guy I picked up on Amazon, and it does a really great job of just kind of giving that architectural lighting effect. And what's nice about solar lights is that they aren't on all night long. So for pollinators, having lights in your garden space will affect them often negatively. And with solar lights, they're only on for so long and then they turn off, and they're not taking any additional power from your home either. So I find they are a great addition. And this one is also nice because it can be either a warm light or a cool light. And warm light does tend to affect pollinators a bit less than a cool, bright light will. So coming over into this area here, our dogwood is also starting to turn color on its leaves. So fall is definitely coming, because there we go. We are getting the red tinge on a lot of the foliage now. Our coneflowers are also wrapping up. Now these, some may consider them to look unsightly and they want to chop them down, but the finches in our area absolutely love these, and they will eat all the way into next spring on them. So for a few of them, I am going to collect the seeds from them, but the rest I will be leaving and letting them reseed themselves, and also leaving them to stand as food for the birds. The thyme down here has also been spreading, and oh, there's another little buzzer on there. And this little peony managed to pull through all year long. I'm so proud of it, and I'm really looking forward to seeing if it actually will bloom for me in future years. This guy I picked up last fall around about this time, and he hadn't bloomed in years for his last house, and they were going to be moving in the winter and weren't able to transplant him, so we took him and gave him a new home. And I'm still not sure what exactly it is going to look like if and when it blooms, but I look forward to it at least filling in this space right here and giving it a bit more structure. Our liatris are done blooming, and now we are left with the stalks. these will eventually turn into seed pods, all of these little ends of the flowers here. And you can collect the seeds and then start new plants from seed. Like alliums though, it will take quite a few, I think it's like 2 or 3 years. I keep saying quite a few, that's very generic. But it will take 2 or 3 years before you actually see flowers coming out of them. And the viburnum is also like, it's grown. I've got a bunch of completely new growth coming out on it. So it's putting out a lot of new shoots, a lot of new length. We have some new buds coming in here. So it's doing really well. What is not doing well, I seem to be the killer of hostas. I had split this one. This seems to be the only one that is surviving in my space, but it's looking a little worse for wear right now. And granted, my garden is in full sun, so the amount of hostas that I can have is really limited. Hostas do typically prefer shadier space, and I may just eventually give up on them. But I had split him and put part of it over here, and it's doing okay. And then I had picked up a new one just to get a bit of variation in foliage. And look at how sad that is. Womp, womp, womp. Miserable. Yet over here, I have a columbine that has been blooming since May, and I just noticed again this morning we have yet another flower bud coming in. So it's not done yet. This thing, once again, they typically like more of a part shade, and they're spring bloom, and this has bloomed all year long for me, and it just keeps on going. It's incredible what it's capable of. So up by the road here, this is where we get more of the fall interest coming into play. This is a burning bush, and it is just starting to turn color now. So this is going to turn into a really vibrant red. These are absolutely beautiful in the fall. So I can't wait to see this turn. Last year it kind of gave a lackluster turn, but it had also just been transplanted. So this year it's probably double the size, maybe not quite. And it is much more established, and it looks like the color is going to be less muddy and more of a vibrant red, so I'm excited for that. Once again, this lavender over here was also pruned back, and it is also reblooming, and it's not as many blooms. And one thing to note on this one, I don't see any white blooms this time around, so I don't know if that's just a fluke on what had happened earlier this spring, but it seems to just be purple right now. I'm going to have to pull this guy out because the squirrels are starting to get to him, and save the seeds before they eat all of the seeds on me. But the sunflower was awesome. It was the best one I had all year long. All the other ones were really small, really puny, didn't really provide much. And then this guy was just amazing. And our Weigelia here, which I had pruned back in this spring, is also starting to change color. So this is another really good one for seasonal interest all year long. It will start to bloom kind of late spring and will bloom for a good chunk of the summer as well. And it has really, if you get a variegated one at least, it has really pretty foliage. And then in the fall, that foliage starts to change and give off a new flush of color. So this is also going to be a nice way to play off the color of the burning bush over here. And this little fence line was not as successful as I had hoped it to be, but I am collecting all of the seeds from the cardinal flowers, and I hope to try it again next year. And the beans as well, I've left them to all go to seed so that I can collect them, because my father-in-law at my raised beds, well, the raised beds are at his place, he likes to pull out all of the plants and not let anything go to seed. So these ones here, I'm letting all of these go to seed so that I can collect them, so that I'll actually have seeds again for next season versus having to buy new. And the back veggie garden, I had really hoped to get around to cleaning this up before showing it off to the world, but it's real. This is the current state of the nation. I took all of the pepper plants and had hauled them out of their pots, and then took all the soil, broke it all down again, and just filled the pots back up so that they would be ready for fall planting should I choose to. Otherwise, I can then store them away. And we'll see what I decide to do with it. The chamomile finally decided to take off. It was looking so sad all year long, and it finally decided that it was happier. The rosemary, kind of. So I may try and take the rosemary into overwinter, but it's really finicky. So I may just give up on that. The eggplant is fairly toast. I've left one to go overripe so that I could do some seed collecting from that. So that's why it is looking such a funny color right now. And the tomatoes, as much as they're still like, we still have flowers coming out, I still have new fruit coming out, it's still producing, and it will probably keep producing until the end of October at least. What you do with these is, if you know you're going to get an actual frost, you're going to want to come out and pick all of your tomatoes off of it, because otherwise they will just turn to mush. Even if you take them inside after the frost to let them ripen up in there, they don't survive the frost very well. So we have another probably good streak or two of plus 20 days that are ahead of us. At least this coming week, I believe we're supposed to be up at around 25 again. And then in October, we typically have a bunch of those as well. So I'm gonna let these guys go as long as possible and see how much more we can get as the season goes on. The fruit is getting smaller and smaller. We're not getting the same size fruit that we used to, and it is also taking longer for them to ripen up. But it is still producing, and it is still giving a bounty, like so many. And I stopped pruning a long while ago, so a lot of these are now feeders that are coming off, and because you can see in here, like I haven't been taking any of the feeders off of them, so it's gone wild over here. But they are also a good probably 3 or 4 feet above the rooftop now when they're standing up straight. But I also gave up stringing them up because it was like, what's the point? The calendula in the pots are also, they are pretty well done now, so I'm going to come in here and collect the rest of the seed heads, because the flower's pretty well done producing. And then I'm going to pull these 3 plants out here. Same thing with my cucamelon. My cucamelon is pretty well toast. So this one's going to come out. This dahlia is pretty sad looking back here. It just never was as happy as the other ones. It has very few blooms that it's actually given me. But the strawberries, on the other hand, just keep on producing, which is really, oh, it's so delicious. And these guys are the tastiest things. Now, I had really great intentions of taking the strawberry runners from this barrel here, or grow bag, and putting them into my gutters, which are up on the fence over here. And what I wanted to do first, though, was fill up the grow bag here. And I found that the amount of runners I put out, all we have really gotten to is filling up this grow bag. It didn't really get beyond that at all. Oh, I have just noticed a little volunteer bloom. I had these guys as annuals last year, and it self-seeded itself. And look at that. That's such a nice treat. Anyways, I digress. The calendula in the grow bags, I will probably leave a little bit longer because it is happier. It has more of a root base to it. The basil in this pot is also going to seed. And I had pulled out all but 2 peppers. I left the peppers that were in the grow bag to see if I would have better success with them than the rotting issues that I was having in my other smaller pots because of what I assumed to be watering stress. And I'm still having, like, this one here actually looks okay. In my other grow bag, though, I'm still having the exact same rot. Nope, this one too. This one's all rotted. Like, they're rotting before they even finish ripening. So these peppers were just a total bust for me. Really did not work out as I had hoped at all. And I still have a few carrots left in this bag. They are more than ready to come out whenever I feel like it. And then this one here has also gone to flower, which means that seeds will be forthcoming with that one as well. So really what's left out here is just kind of waiting for the plants to finish up and then doing a general cleanup in this space, getting things ready for fall planting. Most things should have already been planted out if you are going to be doing any fall planting, except for garlic. And this is going to be my first year planting garlic, but I think I'm going to be repurposing this grow bag here for garlic because it ends up becoming fairly shaded. So pairing garlic with some lettuce, I think, will be a really good addition to this bag. And then the other bags are in more full sun for the rest of the season. The dahlias in this barrel have been very, very happy all season long, and we've also had a lot of volunteer sunflowers that keep producing lots of food for the birds as well. And this one here is a newer one, so once again you can see how it's got so much more pink, like I was mentioning out front, and then older blooms which have more of the yellow. So this barrel has just been so great. Dahlias really loved it. I'm not sure if I would put them in here again though, because it dominated so much real estate that I think I would like to try a few different things again next year, but keep switching them up. You know, that's what you do. Over here, I really want to make use of the space behind that kind of base wood area there with some more annuals and like taller annuals. I would love to put some cosmos and some zinnias over here because that gets a lot of really good sun throughout the day. This time of year it starts to get a bit more shady, but by now the flowers are also normally starting to fade, so it doesn't matter quite as much. But I think that that would make that much prettier to look at than just a weedy wall. And up here, our apple tree, we have tried to get up here and pick the apples and thin things out, and I even did a whole bunch of pruning up so we can actually see above like the top of the garage for the first time in ages. Normally the branches were all laying on the garage. It's the wrong time of year to prune an apple tree, like the absolute worst time. I would not recommend it to anybody, but we were up there with the ladder already trying to get the apples down, and I figure might as well break out the pruners while I was at it and start working away to thin it and create some better airflow, get rid of some of the crossing branches. The problem with pruning it this time of year though is that you are opening it up for fungi to get in, and it's like prime time for it to be getting in there, especially as things begin to get damp with the fall. But this tree seems like it has seen worse and keeps on trucking, so I'm not too concerned about it. But there's still so many apples up there. They keep falling, they keep making a mess. We've just picked up a new tool from Amazon to hopefully help reach and grab some of the taller ones, because even on a ladder, I just can't get in between all of the branches to pull them all down. For both collecting and eating, but also just so that they are not a hazard falling on your head. And then this little grow bag over here, my Swiss chard, has turned into a monster. I really need to start picking some and eating some. I have been so busy and so lazy that I just have not. There's one dish I really like to make with it, with some chickpeas that my mother-in-law taught me how to make. It's delicious. As the weather has cooled off, leaf miners have started to come in, but not with the same ferocity that we saw in the spring. And then my parsley here, I also need to pull out, and I'm going to dry and dehydrate a bunch of that, and that way I have that for use over the winter months. But the parsley did really well in this location. This is probably the best my parsley has ever done. The dahlia has also really liked this pot, and this one here has given me so many blooms all season long, and they've been the spunkiest blooms. The tomatoes here, once again, still going, still popping new fruit out, while old fruit is still coming ripe. And then this pepper here, tucked in behind, once again, this one's like, it's all rotting. So like, it looks like it's gonna be this really nice, lovely fruit, and then it just falls apart. It turns to complete mush. So the pepper plant needs to get pulled out. I've already pulled the basil out of here because it was spent. The tomatoes will get the same treatment as the other space. Parsley needs to get dehydrated, and Swiss chard needs to get eaten, but the Swiss chard will go right until we get some frost in the fall. Like, I'll probably still be able to harvest this right until November in our area, possibly even longer if I do any tarps or like a row covering. Like, I can leave this here as kind of a peak and then toss a tarp over top of it and make like a little row house in this grow bag, and voila, it's like a little mini instant greenhouse to extend the growing season a bit further. And then in doing so, I could even probably plant some other lettuces in here once I pull some of the other stuff out, having that row cover on to help extend the season that much more. And then over here, it's getting all pushed and shoved. This is pretty well toast. The runner beans never gave me a single bean. Really disappointed with that. I guess it is what it is, but I think what ended up happening with this plant is that the pots that I put it in, even though it was just one plant, it was just too small of a pot and too easily dehydrated. So even though I was watering it every single day, I've given up now because it's like, it's coming out. I think it just created a bit too much stress on the plant for the plant to produce any actual usable fruit. Even the same thing with the cardinal climber here, even though it grew and it bloomed. It did not do necessarily as well with the blooms and with producing seed pods as it has in other areas of the yard. And the morning glory, same thing. Even though it's growing, I'm not getting really any blooms out of it in this location. It's just whether it's a sun issue or a stress due to watering issue, because I just have too many things crammed into this. It was a very last minute sort of idea, and it didn't work out quite as planned. So next year, repurposing this teepee would definitely, it needs bigger planters at the base of it instead of these. These just were not sufficient for the intensity of our summer, and it just didn't work out quite as planned. But once I get all of this cleaned up, I'm going to be taking this and putting it out front and repurposing it with some Christmas lights, which I'm really excited that it is Christmas light season soon. I'm probably going to set mine up in October before we get any crazy weather, and I'm not going to turn them on then, and that way everything is set and ready to go, and I just have to plug them in and enjoy. But this is going to make a nice little Christmas tree since I don't have any Christmas trees out front. We're also almost at that time of year where it is time to start filling up the bird feeders again for the winter months, and thinking about all of our little birded friends as well. I've actually got one little guy, if you can see, over at the fountain there, but I haven't filled up that fountain in ages, and it's actually got some algae in it because I've been really busy. And the reason that I have been really busy is not just because of new babies, but we have this little guy as well. So this is little O, and he loves to follow his mama. Can you sit? He's a good boy. He thinks I have the chickens. But yes, this is little O. He is our newest addition to the family. He is a Leonberger, which is the same as the dog that we had previously, who passed away in July. And he has been a handful, but a really lovely addition to our home. But he's also been eating everything back here. So I really have to go through and make sure that we don't have any poisonous plants in the back that he could be getting into. What's nice is winter is coming, and that will help resolve that somewhat. But I know I do have some bittersweet nightshade that is growing in the neighbor's area that has crept over, and I will have to pull that out, and then just making sure along the fence lines that we don't have anything else of concern. And then this back area here is just a weedy sort of spot. And yes, it's fenced off, but I really need to get in there and do a proper haul out of that, because odds are there are other bits and bobs in there that could potentially be an issue. The vegetables are all going to come out soon, but things like a tomato plant are also things of concern. So we've just really had to be on top of him, making sure that he's not getting into anything he's not supposed to, that he's not digging any holes that he shouldn't be digging, and causing general trouble.